Things that Muhammad and the Caliph's successors to Muhammad established is the concept of how to subjugate the Jews and Christians. Remember, they went to Yathrib, which was later named Medina. Yeah, go ahead and let's turn it off now. You guys are awake now?
Yeah.
We're good for another.
Turn the heat up?
Yeah, turn the heat up, sure. I'm off because I'm walking around spewing hot air, but you guys are. So, the way we know that is because the concept of not only did Muhammad make a treaty with Mecca, when he left Mecca, he made a treaty with them, and then he broke that treaty, called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. But we know that from the subjugation of Jews and Christians. Because one of the things that's supposed to happen in the Reliance of the Traveler, there's a whole section on dimitude. Dimitude means the subjection of those who are second class, and then it gives you a list. Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, Sumerians, Sabians. The top two on the list are Jews and Christians. When that happens, you're supposed to pay an extortion tax. It's called jizya. They don't call it an extortion tax. They call it a tax. It's called the jizya. Well, guess what? If they make a deal with you to pay the jizya, they can break that deal at any point. Muhammad did it. The caliphs did it. ISIS is doing it. Did Muhammad order the killing of apostates? If you were there last night, you saw the verses. In this DVD, Islam's Assaults on the Constitution, I share the verses from the Quran, from the Hadith, or the Sunnah, and the Reliance of the Traveler, section 08.1 and 2, that clearly says apostasy is a death sentence. By the words of Muhammad. Did Muhammad order Christians and Jews to be subjugated? Yes.
Yes.
Did Muhammad order the killing of homosexuals? Yes. Did Muhammad take sex slaves? Yes. Did Muhammad take child brides? Yes. Did Muhammad order and participate in beheadings? Yes. Here's what? 7, 6, 7, 8 areas of intersection. Now here's my question. Isn't ISIS doing all the same things? Yes. Now, their tactics are different today. Right? They didn't have trucks back then to run over people. They didn't have cages to throw people in. But beheadings and crucifixions and burning people and raping them and all those things are still alive. In fact, in that DVD on the Assault on the Constitution, I talk about how slavery is alive and well today. Guess who's the #1 proponent of slavery in the world? Islam. It's still alive and well. And not just regular slavery, sexual slavery. So these are things that ISIS is doing. If ISIS is doing it, and Muhammad did it, then the answer is, it's Islamic.
It's okay.
And as I said to a couple of people earlier tonight, the reformation of Islam, if we talk about kind of Islamic reform, Islam is going through a reformation. It went through a reformation 200 plus years ago with Wahhabism. It's going through a reformation today with ISIS. All these groups, yes, are they terrorists? Yes. Are they jihadists? Yes. Are they evil? Yes. But what are they simply trying to do? Force the Islamic community and the rest of the world. But here's why they're killing Muslims, #1. Because they're forcing the Islamic community to go back to an orthodoxy. Egypt, too secular, we got to go back to Islam. Iran, too secular, got to go back to Islam. Libya, too secular, got to go back to Islam. Turkey, you're too secular, got to go back to Islam. We haven't seen an Islamic, what do they call it, Egypt's Arab Spring. This is an Islamic revolution we're seeing across North Africa, the Middle East. Because they have to go back to an orthodoxy. Does that make sense? So when someone says to you Islam can be reformed, say Islam is going through reformation, but it's going back. Yes, ma'am?
Well, the I in ISIS was the first word. What does it mean?
Well, it's the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, correct. So, yeah, by the way, those of you who don't know the background, when ISIS declared themselves as ISIS and not ISIL, as Mr. Obama kept saying, because the word Levant was a geographic region, as you know, which includes Israel. That was not an accident that Obama refused to use the term ISIS. But when they did that, folks, here's the important thing to understand, is that going back, they put together a 10-page document with over 46 verses and references to the teachings of Muhammad, the Quran, the Sunnah, by saying, look, we are Islamic. And as I said last night, even when ISIS kills homosexuals, and I have it in the other DVD, the one on the Constitution, there are hadiths that say stone them. Muhammad said stone them. But there's some obscure hadiths that say throw them off a high place. And so ISIS is so desperate to make sure they're being Islamic, they do both. They throw homosexuals off high buildings and they stone them, just to make sure they cover their bases. Okay? So, Islam is not a religion of peace, unless your definition of peace is surrender. ISIS is Islamic. In fact, I would argue ISIS is the most Islamic organization on the planet today. If you truly go back to word for word, action for action to what Muhammad did. Right? We're talking about true reformation back to Muhammad. Now there are those who say, oh, well, you know, we don't take everything by the letter of the law, we take it by the spirit, and so there are Muslims that live and let live, whatever. Okay, but they're not following orthodoxy. They're not following the practice of Muhammad. So, to wrap this section up, there may be peaceful Muslims that have said, but there's no such thing as a peaceful Islam unless your definition is surrender. There may be moderate Muslims. Well, technically no, because the Quran, the word the Quran uses for them is the word hypocrite. If you're a moderate Muslim, you are a non-practicing Muslim. You're a non-observant Muslim. Devout Muslims must observe. They may not directly fight in jihad, but they must support jihad. The Reliance of the Traveler has an entire section on both the personal obligation of jihad for all Muslims and the communal obligation of jihad for all Muslims. And jihad is very clearly defined in that section as I said earlier, warring against non-Muslims. And how do we know the warring is not spiritual, as Muslims claim, as apologists claim, but how do we know it's literal? Literal fighting. How do we know? Because Muhammad did it. Make sense? Whenever there's a question about Islam, who should we go to? Muhammad. If he did it, it's Islamic. If someone's doing it today, it's Islamic. That's not too hard to understand. It's not radical Islam. There's only one Islam. The Islam of Muhammad and Allah. By the way, I did that on purpose. Muhammad and Allah. Why? 86% of the text is about Muhammad. It's all about Muhammad. 93 times in the Quran, Muslims are commanded to imitate Muhammad. They call him the Al-Insan al-Kamil. In Arabic, that means he's the perfect man. I know, shocking. In the Sahih Muslim, Sahih means most authenticated. Muslim is the second quoted hadith. Muhammad said, this is his words, I have been commanded to fight against people till they testify that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. That is the Shahada, the first pillar of Islam. If you sincerely say that, or even under duress if you say it, you can become a Muslim. They will consider you a Muslim. By the way, they're teaching these phrases in our schools today.
That's right.
They're having kids do calligraphy exercises using these phrases. So Muhammad has been commanded to fight until people become Muslim. And we know it's a literal fight because Muhammad literally fought. Then why would we think that if Muslims are doing it, they're somehow not Muslim? They're somehow not representative of the faith. You understand, we're being sold such a bill of goods. This is now on the level of propaganda.
Oh yeah.
Like beyond propaganda. Okay, let me give you some examples. I'm going to briefly head into this presentation just for a couple of minutes. Some examples, and this was the presentation I did last night, but I just want to give you at least one example tonight of why Islamic law, the Sharia, is antithetical to our Constitution. I highly encourage you to get that DVD because that is a legal argument. What I gave last night was a legal argument for why our Constitution, Declaration of Constitutional Bill of Rights, cannot coexist with Islamic law. Not the individual Muslim, but Islamic law. So I want to talk about the lack of women's rights. Lots of gals in the room here. And maybe that you guys gals can take this and share it with some of your feminist friends and some of those ladies out there that are so wanting to protect Islam and defend it and say it's so nice and tolerant and peaceful. And then Muhammad, oh, here's the best one. Muhammad, he was a protector of women's rights. You've seen those billboards?
No.
You've seen that one? He believed in women's rights. You haven't seen that billboard? It says, Muhammad be peace be upon him. He believed in equality, justice, and women's rights. Yeah. I have it in one of my other presentations. Okay, Surah 434, women are allowed to be beaten by their husbands or the fathers in certain areas. As I said last night, there's a section in the Reliance of the Traveler, and it's called permissible hitting. And it's not capital punishment hitting like with your children, or not capital punishment, corporal punishment. It's permissible hitting against your wife, which you and I would in this country call assault, right? Domestic violence. Women in the Sahih Bukhari, that's the most quoted hadith, women's minds are deficient according to Muhammad in answering the question of legal testimony. The question was brought up about the legal testimony of a woman, and Muhammad said the testimony of a woman is equal to half that of a man. Why? Because her mind is deficient. So ladies, according to Muhammad, your mind is mush, so you can't be trusted in your testimony. This is a legal issue.
That's scary.
Okay?
Very.
Reliance to the traveler. ROT is reliance to the traveler. Section N1003, women cannot travel without permission from their husbands away from their hometown. Women can't leave home without their permission. Polygamy is permitted. ROT 5.2. Now remember, this is a violation of not only natural law, God said marriage is between only one man and one woman, but also U.S. law. It's outlawed in all 50 states. Yet it's happening and being practiced in America. Here, South Seattle and the Somali community and many communities around America, it's being practiced. It's just that, like in Europe, it's just that they don't say they're the wives, right? Because it's illegal. They say it's my cousin, my sister, my aunt, whatever. But we know it's happening in many states. This female general militia I talked about last night, Carrie Hooks is here with us. Carrie mentioned that they're dropping this bill next year, you said, Carrie, at Olympia.
French stuff.
Carrie.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Carrie. My background.
Yeah, they're gonna
Carrie French, yeah.
Next year.
Next year, they're dropping the FGM bill again. So I encourage you to call your representatives and get them to support it. Why in a liberal state like Washington we can't pass this one? Outlawing this barbaric practice is beyond me. But these two doctors, as you know, were arrested in Michigan, may or may not know, for performing this practice on 7-year-olds. And it is barbaric. Now, just to be accurate, if you call your representative or you go visit your elected officials in Olympia and they tell you, oh, well, we were visited by the Muslim advocates and they told us this is forbidden. No, not only is it it is not forbidden. In the Sharia law book, it is permissible. Now, it's not mandatory, but it is permissible. Meaning that the practice can be done, and it spells it out in great detail in this book. And in fact, it even talks about the body parts. So, I mean, look, this is not just a religious book. This is a legal textbook. And it spells everything from religious to all the legal codes, civil, criminal statutes, punishments for different crimes, and it even tells you how to go to the bathroom. Yes, Karen?
In Washington, we were going at the cultural aspect and not so much the religious aspect.
Right.
But these two doctors in court have made a legal argument that it is part of their religion, so it
Right.
should be protected under the First Amendment.
Right.
So not sure how legislators are going to take that, but I know they get really, really squeamish when we start, when we take the focus off the culture part and put it on the religious part. They don't want
But
to
tie the religious to the legal.
Right.
Right? We have to tie, in my opinion, the religious to the legal. You go, okay, there are certain things that are religious, right? But that if they're practiced and they violate our laws, then this should be prohibited.
That's right.
And so this is again where we're talking about public accommodation. If a Muslim wants to go and pray in his house 5 times a day or 100 times a day, I don't care. Go for it. But the moment you bring public accommodation and you do something, last night I was telling the example when I was a police officer, a Muslim from Iran, domestic violence call. I go to their house, he had beaten his wife, black and blue-eyed, cuts across her hand, and he owned up to it. Yeah, I hit her. She was out of line. And when I told them, turn around, you're under arrest, but wait a second, in Iran, that's totally legal. I did nothing wrong. Well, you're not in Iran, sir. You're in America. Turn around, you're under arrest. But so I would say, take the religious argument, don't stay there, make it a legal argument.
Yep.
The issue is public accommodation that violates our constitutionally protected rights. Children that come into this nation, it's amazing how the left wants it both ways. Right? They want it both ways. They want to say, oh, we should give rights to foreign nationals. Well, they're not citizens. Oh, it doesn't matter. We should give them the same rights as Americans. Then when they come here and they're foreign nationals or they're here on visas or they're immigrants and their rights are being violated, now when it comes to protecting their rights, oh, we don't want to infringe on their religion. You can't have it both ways. So make the religious argument to a legal argument. But if you only make it cultural and they say, oh, well, it has nothing to do with it, we can't. Because that's the problem. We have to explain that this is spelled out in law. And by the way, it's not just religion, it's law. And that's why I'm trying to make the argument. Finally, child brides, of course, you know that situation. Maybe some of you know the story of Aisha, one of Muhammad's 11 wives, who was 6 when the marriage was betrothed, contractually to him, and 9 when it was consummated. So he was 50 at the time. Now in this country we call that pedophilia, child abuse, right? So, by the way, all of these things are against American law.
Yep.
Women cannot be beaten, that's assault. The legal right of a woman and the testimony of a woman is considered equal to that of a man in our courts. Certainly women have the right to lead. Again, where are all the feminists that are all pro-choice?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Where are they?
Polygamy, of course, is a violation of law and natural law, and this is just child abuse and pedophilia. All of these aspects, and these are not radical Islam. These are clearly stated religious aspects of Sharia, and they're all violations of our law. So do you see a compatibility issue? And again, this is just one area that I spell out in the DVD. We have multiple areas: slander, homosexuals, apostasy, the issue of slavery, the issue of religious freedom, dimitude for religious minority. All those things we talk about. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
That's why they want separate Sharia courts.
Correct. Well, initially, right? They want separate Sharia courts or tribunals, initially, like in Europe. Remember, long term, they want ultimately the nation to be governed like in Iran, right? So Iran, the overthrow and the revolution brought forth the change, violently, that they were allowed to establish an Islamic government. But yes, you're right. In the interim, like we see in Europe, they want parallel legal systems. And the feminists support them. Recently we had this year World Hijab Day, where they want to celebrate wearing hijabs. You had a Jewish rabbi joining in. Alicia Keys got trouble for this one and had to take it down when she posted this about our strengths and our differences, our powers and our diversity. It's so beautiful. By the way, no woman in the Muslim country is going to be doing this. St. Paul Academy, private academy in Minnesota, wear a hijab day. These are not Muslim women. These are not Muslims.
How naive.
And then here, this is a publicly funded high school. This is private. This is public. These are tax dollars. Olean High School in New York, as an example. By the way, an Olean High School in New York is one of the places where the Muslim Student Association is getting on the campuses now. They're not just on college campuses, they're on high school. They're starting to get open doors to go on high school campuses. Now, my question always reciprocally is, how come we're not having a Wear a Cross Day, or Wear a Yarmulke Day, or Wear a Star of David Day? And every time I ask that question, the response I get is, those are religious things. But this is cultural. This is cultural. This is cultural. Not cultural. It's indoctrination.
Yep.
And by the way, I said this last night. The second demographic, the number one demographic of people getting converted to Islam in America is in our prison systems, blacks and Hispanics.
Yes.
The second demographic of conversion in America, young girls on college campuses. They are intentionally targeted by Muslims, young Muslim guys who are strong and virile and good looking, and they get wooed. And I've talked to these girls. I talked to a girl who was going to Edmonds Community College and married the guy after a month.
Oh, wow.
And then she was like, I'm going to go back to Egypt to live with him. I begged her, please don't go back to Egypt. She eventually did. She was raised as a Christian. I said, by the way, when you were dating him, did he criticize your Christianity? Oh, no. He was really supportive. What happened after you get married? Did he criticize your Christianity? Yeah, all the time he talks about it. Yeah, because you're a fool. What else can I say? So this is intentional. They're trying to normalize Islamic practices. And when I said to you earlier, you got to look at what's happening with Sharia, by the Brotherhood especially. How many of you know Linda Sarsour?
Yep.
Linda, right? Linda, who is pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, connected to the Brotherhood. At first, we were seeing denial of Sharia. 3 stages. Denial of Sharia. We don't want Sharia in America. The Brotherhood was saying that several years ago. We don't want Sharia in America. We just want to be able to have the same rights. Then it was now defense of Sharia. Well, you don't understand. Sharia is misunderstood.
Yeah.
You just don't quite understand. And then the third stage, defense is number 2. The third stage, promotion of Sharia. Just look at enclaves in Europe. On the Islam's Assault and Constitution DVD, I have some videos from Europe. And you'll see the Muslims on the streets with the blowhorns, the megaphones, with trucks, Sharia all over plastered, going through the communities, giving leaflets. Sharia is best. Submit to Islam. Sharia is better for you than British law. I mean, they're just not hiding it anymore. Why? Because Europe has been deemed Dar el-Islam.
Of London.
They believe that they have already gotten the upper hand in Europe and become Dar el-Islam. By the way, you don't need 50% of the population, according to the Muslim Brotherhood, to become the upper house. So, let's look at some tweets from Ms. Sarsour. Look at the date, 2011. Sharia law is reasonable. And once you read it, the details, it makes a lot of sense. People just know the basics. This is not the basics. This is the Islamic textbook on Sharia. So we know a little bit more than the basics, Ms. Sarsour. How about this one? I don't drink alcohol, don't eat pork, I follow Islamic way of living. That's all Sharia is. Really? How about this, 2050? Look how it's changing. You'll know when you're living. Remember, defense. Remember, defense to promotion, right? Watch this. You'll know when you're living under Sharia law, suddenly all your loans and credit cards become interest-free. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Because Sharia financing. Muslims are forbidden from paying interest. And so we bend over backwards and accommodate, just like our former disgraced mayor of Seattle, who wanted to have Sharia law for Muslims in Seattle, so that they can get down. What's unequal protection and access under the law is you and I don't get access to those products. We don't get that offer to have a loan product that we just pay a fee up front and no interest long term. We don't get that offer. They do. That's obviously unconstitutional. Yeah. If you're still paying interest and Sharia law hasn't taken over America, just saying. Here's another one. 10 weeks of paid maternity leave in Saudi Arabia. Yes, paid. And you're worrying about women driving. Puts us to shame. And then I mentioned this one. SPLC backing Ms. Sarsour. That's why they won't put the Brotherhood on the hate list. Islamophobes have been attacking Women's March organizer. By the way, she was the co-organizer of the Women's March after the inauguration of President Trump. We stand with her against this type of hate and bigotry. Hashtag I march with Linda. So, before we go to the second half, we have to understand, when I say no to Sharia in America, there are religious aspects of Sharia that can be accommodated in the sense of how many times they pray, and what they eat, and going to the house and praying. Even if you want to argue, maybe okay, they're able to build a mosque because it's a house of worship. The moment any aspect of the law demands public accommodation or violates our laws and our rights that are protected under the Constitution, you and I should be up in arms, I don't mean literally, and we should be outraged. Because now our very system of government is under attack. And let's go back and remember the mission statement of the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't want to coexist. They want to sabotage from within using our hands. And that's what they're doing. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, the second half, I'm going to go much quicker because I want to just quickly touch on a few things that are practically happening in America. Refugee resettlement, should we be concerned?
Yes.
Are schools indoctrinating in Islam?
Yes.
Christianity perverted for money, you'll see that. How interfaith dialogue is a part of this ecumenical gospel that's compromising the message of Christ, and more. On Unveiled DVD, there's a special feature section on the Trojan horse of Islamic migration. I go into more detail there. But I want to just touch on 3 aspects. 1, ideology. Why should we, as Americans, as Westerners, as Christians, be concerned about not just mass, obviously there's a concern about mass refugee resettlement from any country, right? From any background, because there are questions about can the local society handle it? What's the impact on schools and welfare and housing and the law enforcement community and so forth and so on, right? I mean, those are legitimate. Those should be legitimate questions. Where if you raise those questions, you shouldn't be called a bigot and a racist and a xenophobe.
Right.
They're legitimate questions. And by the way, here's a legitimate question: who is paying for those services?
Yeah.
We are.
Because you have no oversight. Your legislators in the state legislature don't know what's going on or where they're coming. The governor doesn't know unless they're in the know. So there's no representation. But the main reason with Islam is because there's ideology behind it. Islam is the only religion and governmental ideology that actually has a concept regarding migration or immigration, and it's called the hijrah. The word hijrah itself means migration. How do we know this is so important to Islam? Well, one, Muhammad did it. Remember Muhammad again? 622 AD, mass migration of his followers from Mecca to Medina. At that time it was called Yathrib. Gain power, accumulate their power base, right? Here's an example of that. We are, as conservatives, are all spread out. What would happen if we all go buy a 100-acre piece of property and all live together on a commune and say we're all going to share our resources, support each other, protect? I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm just saying, what if we did that? Would that give us a certain level of strength?
Yes.
Right? That's basically what an enclave is. So Muhammad did this, but here's another reason why it's important to Islam, and I was telling some people at the table earlier. The Islamic calendar is based off the Hijrah. Islam didn't start when Muhammad got revelation in Mecca. Islam starts when Muhammad goes to Medina. The Islamic calendar is based off of the acronym AH, after Hijrah. So Islam really starts when they go to Medina. Islam really starts with the verses of the sword. That's why if you remove abrogation, there's no Islam. So Muhammad told his followers to do three things: migrate, populate, which they do really well. Right? Remember birth rate in Europe for non-Muslims? 1.45. Average Muslim birth rate in Europe, 4.7 to 5.1. Highest birth rate is in France at over 8. Just do the math, right? That's why people are saying by 2050 it could be Eurabia. You have people, countries like Belgium, that they're saying even earlier, maybe as early as 2030. 40% of children born in Belgium are Muslims. 40%. So, birth rate. And then add migration on top of that, the massive influx of refugees, and it's just speeding up the process.
Look at London.
Sure, London, the enclave, Sharia courts, right? You look at France, 751 urban sensitive zones. You look at Sweden, you look at Norway, you look at Germany. 1.2 million refugees now have come into Germany. The majority are Muslim young men. And you guys, if you were here hearing Heidi before, you would have heard that. So, but the third concept is one we don't get. And that is Muhammad called for the segregation. He called for them to join together in strength to segregate. So fundamentally, if Muslims who are following the example of Muhammad migrate en masse and you start seeing enclaves more, fundamentally they will not assimilate. Did you get that?
Yeah.
They will not assimilate because it's a commandment. Now how do we know this? Again, Muhammad did. This is a picture of Hamtramck, not Dearborn, Hamtramck. Hamtramck now is the first Muslim majority populated city in America.
Where is that at?
In Michigan.
Say the name again?
Hamtramck. Hamtramck used to be a little Polish community. Today it is now a Muslim community, and that's why I said earlier, it has the first Muslim majority city council in America. Go read some of the ordinances, some of the things that are coming out of Hamtramck, and you'll see if Sharia is being implemented. So, how do we know that this is part of jihad? Why is Hijrah part of jihad? Remember, what's jihad? Warring against non-Muslims. Is all jihad physical violence? No. Remember what the mission statement of the Brotherhood said? We're going to wage what? Civilization jihad. Cultural jihad, right? It's not just all physical, we're going to kill you, blow you up, run you over with a Home Depot truck. We're talking about there's other aspects. Now, here's what Muhammad said in the hadith. I charge you with 5 of what Allah has charged me. Assemble, listen, obey, immigrate, and to wage jihad for the sake of Allah. That's not my bad grammar, by the way. That's the way it's written in the text. So immigration is part of what? Waging jihad. Doesn't that change the whole parameter? Shouldn't ideology matter? Yet the moment you bring up ideology, kind of like what Terry was saying earlier, the moment you bring up any aspect of ideology, they shut down. They can't take it. Okay, you don't believe my words. Let's listen to Linda Sarsour. Now I say listen because, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. You know, as a Christian, I want to have compassion for those who hate me. But her voice just really drives me crazy. But just bear with me. It's a couple of minutes. Let me get the microphone. Well, I don't know. You'll be able to hear this because she yells. Okay, watch what she says. First of all, about our president, and then watch what she says about whether they're going to assimilate or not. Listen to this.
Administration. And I hope that when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad, that we are struggling against tyrants and rulers, not only abroad in the Middle East or in the other side of the world, but here in these United States of America, where you have fascists and white supremacists and Islamophobes reigning in the White House. We have to stay outraged. Do not criticize me when I say that we as a Muslim community in these United States of America have to be perpetually outraged every single. When I wake up in the morning and I remember who's sitting in the White House, I am outraged. This is not normal, sisters and brothers. Those people sitting in the most powerful seats in this country is not normal. So do not ever be those citizens that normalize this administration, because when the day comes that something horrific happens to us or to another community, you will be responsible for normalizing this administration.
Listen to what she says next.
Our number one and top priority is to protect and defend our communities. It is not to assimilate and to please any other people in authority. Our obligation is to our young people, is to our women, and make sure our women are protected in our community. And our top priority, even higher than all those priorities, is to please Allah and only Allah.
Our top priority is to please Allah and only Allah. That means we're going to follow Allah and His law. The Sharia Allah, the law of Allah, the way of Allah. And our top priority is the protection of our community. I'm sure she's talking about America, right? Wrong. And now I had to listen to this 3 times just to make sure, did I just hear her right? That we will not assimilate. Thank you, Linda. Thanks for telling us. Why is nobody paying attention?
Right.
Oh, you don't want that spread. They don't. Now, this was spoken June 30th at the ISNA conference in Illinois. They know this is going to go public. They know these videos are going to end up on YouTube. Why would she openly say that? Is she being careless? No. Because they're ramping things up. They're sending a message. Just like I'll talk about later, Khalila Sabra and Nihad Awad, a year and a half ago, when they sided with Black Lives Matter and called for revolution. Yes, ma'am?
How does she get away with this? Because she has a deficient mind. I mean, how do the Muslim men get away with
yes. A lot of feminists who support her have a deficient mind. Remember, she was the co-organizer of the Women's March.
Yeah, I know, but why did the Muslim men put up with this? Yeah.
Well, because they're using the women up front.
Okay, so.
It sells.
But her day will come.
Well, her place will come,
Yeah.
but they're being used. She's a good soldier.
Yeah.
But the issue is, look, they're telling us they're fomenting racists and Islamophobes and white supremacists ruling in the White House. All of us. And, we're all, and this is what they're for, And here's my thing to Linda. I'm like, look, if you're perpetually outraged, then let's get you a ticket and get you out of here. Go to another country. If you hate America so much, then feel free to leave. Yes, ma'am, real quick.
Earlier I said that our government was afraid.
Yes.
of this,
Yes.
But I almost believe, and I don't want to believe, but I almost believe that they're in on it. I mean, that's
Well,
how I feel.
they're infiltrated, no doubt. So when we say they're afraid, there are some that are afraid, and there are some that are absolutely infiltrated and in on it, meaning they're either carrying the water or they're part of the plan. There's no doubt There's no way that they would be able to get away with this stuff unless we understood how deeply infiltrated they are in our government. So we have to understand where we're at. Now, obviously, you know and I know there's been enough talk about the national security concerns about refugee resettlement. Comey's testimony about Syrian refugees back 2 years ago when he said we can query our database until the cows come home, but nothing will be showing up because we have no record of them. You know, these nations are in turmoil. How about Phil Haney, a true patriot, and who blew the whistle? He was forced out of DHS. Remember, by the way, it is Department of Homeland Security that vets the refugees, not the FBI. State Department has to send the names to DHS to vet. I have a friend of mine at DHS who was part of this process for 5 years who said, look, there's so much fraud, there's not information, fake birth certificates, fake birthdays. This is a racket. I have an article here from WorldNet Daily of a State Department whistleblower who talks about how fraudulent the refugee resettlement program is. But this is what he said before Congress. Based on what I've seen in the Department of Homeland Security, I no longer have confidence that the administration can adequately vet or screen refugees or immigrants from Islamic countries. He testified that after he was forced out of DHS, when they erased and destroyed his evidence that he had, by the way, on the Dio Bondi movement that was tied to the San Bernardino attacks. Remember those two? Mm-hmm. So he is traveling around the country, and I'm going to try to see if we can get him out to Washington State next year.
He spoke to our tea party.
He did here?
He did.
Fantastic, fantastic. We're going to try to see if we can get him out to Spokane next year. And there's someone else I want to see if we can get as well. Now, one of the arguments against refugee resettlement has been, oh, but we haven't seen any refugees kill anybody. Or any of these temporary immigrants kill anybody. Well, listen, that argument went out the window a few days ago. What happened in New York changed the whole thing. Well, it should change the whole thing. But here's some examples of arrests. My friend in the FBI was part of this case, Fazli Kurbanov, Boise, Idaho. He was a refugee, plotted to blow up a military base and attack people, and he's in prison now. 2 Sudanese and 1 Iraqi boy raped a 5-year-old little girl in Twin Falls, Idaho. Nothing barely happens to them. The media, the city, and the police should all be ashamed of themselves for how they handled that case. Dihar Adon, I was in St. Cloud, Minnesota last month. I was at the mall, the Crossroads Mall. He was the one who went in there and tried to stab at least 11 people. He was shot and killed, but fortunately nobody died. You remember Ali Arton, the Ohio State car, drove over people, stabbed them. A campus police officer shot and killed him. Fortunately nobody died. Liban Mohammed, Aberdeen, South Dakota, in the country 1 week. Sexually assaults a 31-year-old disabled woman. And listen, I have numerous examples that I can show you. I can give you, and of course, Saifullah Saipov, Patterson, New Jersey. This is the New York City attacker who was allowed into the country under a diversity visa program. By the way, what's interesting is when President Trump a few weeks ago put forth their immigration plan, it was in the language of that plan that they want to get rid of the diversity lottery visa program. He reiterated again after the attack. We'll see if it happens, because he wants to do it through Congress, and you know our spineless Republicans. So we'll see if that happens. But now we have 8 dead Americans, and now their argument of, well, no refugee or these immigrants have killed anybody. That went out the window. ISIS, of course, has promised to infiltrate refugee populations both in Europe and in the U.S. In fact, the Syrian foreign minister was on record as saying they believe that 20% of the refugees coming into Europe are ISIS inspired or ISIS fighters. Because look at the age. Look at the age.
Yeah.
Office of Refugee Resettlement here in the U.S. When you hear the argument from the left and those that are bleeding over mass refugee resettlement, they'll say this, but what about all the women and children? My answer to them is, show me the evidence where the majority are women and children. Go back to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. You look at the Syrian refugees, I think back in 2015, over 60% were under the age of 35, men. Men! Yes, ma'am.
The churches are involved.
Oh, we're going to talk about that. Hold on. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry. I've saved my wrath for the best. We are now seeing this. Attracted to cheap labor. JBS meatpacking.
Pilot.
Yeah, but the Tyson.
Tyson, something like that.
We see this happened. I was in Aberdeen, South Dakota,
Yeah.
in Twin Falls, in Boise, Idaho. There's now, yes,
Chobani.
document was purged. Here's why. Ted Cruz brought this before Senate Judiciary Committee this year, testified on this with this visual. It's powerful. 9/11 Commission report after 9/11. Why were we attacked, folks? Oh, we don't know what's the motivation. Well, we're going to look into it. They came up with the motivation. Had nothing to do with violent extremism. It had everything to do with Islam. They mentioned jihad 126 times, Muslims 145 times, Islam 322 times, Muslim Brotherhood 5 times. Now, remember I said, Comment Obama comes in. The whole Justice Department changes. Under the direction of FBI Director Robert Mueller, they allow members of the Muslim Brotherhood to get access to classified, top security clearance training materials.
Yep.
PowerPoints, manuals, books, and speakers. They're allowed to go through all this stuff and do an audit. And anything that is deemed offensive is taken out. So the very people who tell us by their own words that their mission is to destroy us from within are given access to our national security apparatus.
Yep.
So you're asking me how bad this is? This is how bad it is. And here's the result. Here's why we don't recognize Islamic jihadi attacks. FBI counterterrorism lexicon, zeros. National Intelligence Strategy 2009, zeros. Strategic Plan to Prevent